if I told you that one of the biggest turning points of World War II didn't happen on a battlefield? It didn't involve a single tank or a single bomb. It all came down to one thing: a dead body, found floating in the ocean. This body was carrying a briefcase, and inside that briefcase was a secret letter that would change the course of the war. But here's the secret that nobody knew. The body wasn't who they said he was. The briefcase was a lie, and the letter, it was the bait in the most elaborate trap ever set for Adolf Hitler. You think you know the stories of World War II. You don't know this one. This is the story of the man who never was, and how his ghost saved thousands of lives. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is 100% true, and it's crazier than any spy movie you've ever seen. To understand this crazy plan, you need to understand the problem the Allies were facing in 1943. The year is critical. The Allies had finally pushed the Germans and Italians out of North Africa. A huge victory. But now, what's the next move? Look at a map. The next logical step is to invade Europe and start pushing back against Hitler. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, called Europe the soft underbelly of the beast. He wanted to attack Italy first, and the perfect stepping stone to Italy was the island of Sicily. But here's the problem. The plan was obvious, so obvious in fact that the Germans knew it too. They were waiting. They had turned Sicily into a fortress, with hundreds of thousands of German and Italian soldiers, machine guns and tanks, ready for an invasion. If the Allies attacked Sicily directly, it would be a bloodbath. They would lose thousands of soldiers on the beaches. They needed a miracle. They needed to make the Germans look the other way. So how do you convince your enemy that you're going to attack Greece and Sardinia when you're really going to attack Sicily? You can't just send them a fake message. They're not stupid. You need to make them find the information by accident. You need to make them feel like they've outsmarted you. This is where two British intelligence officers enter the story. Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley. They remembered a strange idea from a memo that had been floating around. This memo was full of wild ideas for tricking the enemy. Interestingly, it was inspired by a writer who would later become very famous, Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond. The idea was number 28 on the list. It was simple, and it was insane. Find a dead body, dress him up as an officer, give him fake secret documents, and then drop him in the ocean where the enemy will find him. The idea was that the enemy would think he was a courier who died in a plane crash. It was a long shot, a huge gamble. If it failed, the real invasion of Sicily would be a disaster. Remember that dead body I told you about at the beginning? The man who would fool Hitler. This is where his story truly begins. Not in the ocean, but in a cold, dark morgue in London. Montague and Cholmondeley had their plan. They called it Operation Mincemeat. Now they needed their main actor, a body. But they couldn't just use anyone. The body had to be perfect. It had to look like a man who drowned after a plane crash. No signs of other injuries. He had to be fresh. Finding him was their first secret mission, and they did. They found the body of a homeless man named Glyndor Michael. He had tragically died after eating rat poison. His body showed no signs of external damage. He was the perfect tragic candidate. No one would miss him. No one would come looking for him. He would become their silent hero. Okay, so they had a body. But a body is just a body. To fool the Germans, this man needed a life. He needed a personality. He needed a story. So the intelligence team became storytellers. They became Hollywood scriptwriters. They created a completely fictional person, Captain, Acting Major, William Martin of the Royal Marines. They gave him the name Martin because it was a common name in the Royal Marines. They made him a major so he would be important enough to carry secret letters, but not so famous that the Germans would be suspicious if they had never heard of him. The real genius was in the small details. The things they put in his pockets. They called it pocket litter. They gave him keys, stamps, and a ticket stub from a London theatre show. They gave him an angry letter from his bank manager about an overdraft. Why? Because real people have money problems. And most importantly, they gave him a photo of his fiancée, named Pam, and 2 romantic love letters from her. Pam was actually a clerk who worked in their office. These items made Major Martin feel real. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a man in love, with a life waiting for him back home. All of this, the body, the name, the pocket litter, was just the packaging. The most important part was the bait, the secret document hidden inside his briefcase. The briefcase was chained to his wrist to make it look extra important. Inside was a personal letter. written from one top general in London to another general in North Africa. The letter was cleverly written. It mostly talked about boring official business to make it sound authentic, but then tucked inside was the poison, the lie. The letter casually mentioned that the Allies were planning to invade Europe through Greece and Sardinia. It even made a joke about trying to make the Germans think they were going to invade Sicily as a diversion. It was a masterstroke of reverse psychology. You are telling the enemy your secret plan, but you frame it as a trick. The Germans would read it and think, aha, we knew they were going to try and trick us into thinking it's Sicily, but we are smarter. We found this letter. The real target is Greece. It was a brilliant gamble that played right into the enemy's ego. Now it was time for the final act. They had their man, Major Martin, and his secret letter. They carefully preserved the body and placed him inside a special steel canister packed with dry ice. The canister was labeled, "Handle with care, optical instruments," just in case anyone saw it. On April 19, 1943, the British submarine HMS Seraph secretly left Scotland. The crew of the submarine was not told what was inside the canister. Only the captain knew the truth. For 10 long days, the submarine traveled silently towards the coast of Spain. Why Spain? Because even though Spain was officially neutral in the war, it was full of German spies. The British knew that if the body washed up in Spain, the Spanish authorities would find it, and the German spies would be all over it in a matter of hours. The location had to be perfect. Just off the coast of a town called Huelva, a place known to have a very active and very curious German agent. With their dead hero, Major Martin, ready for his mission, the next phase of the plan began. The body was carefully sealed inside a special steel canister. It was filled with dry ice to keep him preserved. On the outside, the canister was labeled, "Handle with care, optical instruments," just in case anyone saw it. On April 19, 1943, this strange cargo was loaded onto the British submarine, HMS Seraph. The crew of the submarine had no idea what they were carrying. They were simply told it was a top-secret weather device. Only the captain knew the truth. For 10 long days, the submarine traveled under the water, in complete silence, heading towards the coast of Spain. Every single person on board knew this was a dangerous mission, but they could never have guessed that the fate of the war was resting inside a cold, steel tube on their deck. On the morning of April 30th, just before dawn, the HMS Seraph reached its destination, about a mile off the coast of Huelva, a small town in Spain. The captain gathered a few officers on the deck. The air was cold and silent. They opened the canister. Major Martin, dressed in his full uniform, was finally revealed. His briefcase was still chained to his wrist. The crew gently lifted him out. It was a strange, somber moment. They were not burying a man, but an idea, a grand deception. The captain opened a prayer book and read Psalm 39. "I will keep my mouth with a bridle, the wicked is before me." As he finished, they gently slid the body of Major Martin into the dark water. They watched as the tide slowly began to carry him towards the Spanish shore and towards his destiny. Then the submarine silently slipped back beneath the waves and disappeared. The bait was set. A few hours later, just as the sun was rising, a local Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria was checking his nets. He saw something strange floating in the water. As he got closer, he realized with horror that it was the body of a man in uniform. He immediately alerted the authorities. Soon the Spanish military arrived. They pulled the body from the water. They saw the uniform of a British Royal Marine. They saw the very important-looking briefcase chained to his wrist. Word spread quickly through the town. A dead British officer had washed ashore. This was exactly what the British spies in London had hoped for. The news was out. And they knew that in a town like Huelva, it wouldn't be long before the news reached the ears of someone very, very interested. The German spies. Spain was officially a neutral country in the war, but in reality, it was a hornet's nest of spies, and the town of Huelva had one of Germany's most active and a man named Adolf Klaus. He was a master of gathering intelligence. Within hours, Klaus heard the news about the dead British officer. His instincts told him this was something big, an officer carrying a briefcase. This was not an accident. This was a potential goldmine of information. He immediately sent a coded message to his bosses in Madrid, and from there, the message went straight to the top intelligence officials in Berlin. The German spy machine began to move. They had to get their hands on that briefcase. The British had dangled the bait, and the German fish were starting to swim towards it. Back in London, the British spies were waiting nervously. They knew the Germans were interested. Now they had to make the briefcase seem even more valuable. So they started the next part of their plan, a fake diplomatic fight. The British embassy in Madrid began sending a flood of angry, urgent messages to the Spanish government. You must find the briefcase of Major Martin. It is of the highest importance. It contains secret documents. It must be returned to us immediately, unopened. They made a huge fuss. They acted like it was a disaster for them. More importantly, for the German spies listening in, it was proof. This briefcase was not just important. It was critically important. Now the Germans wanted it more than ever. Meanwhile, the Spanish authorities performed an autopsy on the body. This was a moment of huge risk for the British. If the Spanish doctor discovered that the man hadn't really drowned or that he had been dead for too long, the whole plan would be exposed. But the British had another trick up their sleeve. The doctor performing the autopsy was secretly friendly to the British cause. He knew what he had to do. He performed a very quick, very simple examination. His official report concluded that the man was a Royal Marine who had been in the sea for several days and had died from drowning. It was the perfect conclusion. It confirmed the story of a plane crash at sea. The first major hurdle had been cleared. The lie was still alive. The Spanish government was now in a difficult position. The British were demanding the briefcase back. But their friends, the Germans, were desperate to see what was inside. The Spanish leader Franco didn't want to make either side too angry. So they did what they did best. They played both sides. Officially, they promised the British they would return the briefcase as soon as possible. But unofficially, they made a deal with the German spies. They told the top German agent in Madrid that he could borrow the briefcase for a very short time. He would have to be very, very careful. The British must never know that it had been opened. For the Germans, this was the moment they had been waiting for. In a secret location in Madrid, German intelligence experts got to work. This was not a simple task. They couldn't just rip the envelope open. They had to open it, photograph the contents, and then seal it again so perfectly that the British would never know it had been touched. Using steam, thin rods, and incredible patience, they slowly unsealed the flap of the main envelope. It was a nerve-wracking process. One tiny tear, one small mistake, and the entire deception could be revealed. Finally, they got it open. And there it was. The official letter, signed by a top British general. Their hands trembling with excitement, they carefully removed the letter. The biggest secret of the Allied invasion was in their hands. This was not a simple task. They couldn't just rip the envelope open. They had to open it, photograph the contents, and then seal it again so perfectly that the British would never know it had been touched. Using steam, thin rods, and incredible patience, they slowly unsealed the flap of the main envelope. It was a nerve-wracking process. One tiny tear, one small mistake, and the entire deception could be revealed. Finally, they got it open. And there it was. The official letter, signed by a top British general. Their hands trembling with excitement, they carefully removed the letter. The biggest secret of the Allied invasion was in their hands. Or so they thought. Every page of the letter was photographed. The German agents read the contents in disbelief. It was better than they could have imagined. The bait had been taken. Now it was time to see if the biggest fish of all would bite. In Berlin, the intelligence reports from Spain caused a massive stir. Germany's top spy analysts examined the photographs of the letter. They checked every detail, the signature, the type of paper, the official stationery. To them, everything looked perfect. It was a genuine letter from a top British general. They were especially convinced by the casual, personal tone of the letter and the mention of the overdraft, small, human details that a forger might overlook. They concluded with high confidence that the document was real. The Allies, they believed, had gotten careless, and a lucky accident had revealed their entire invasion plan. The analysts compiled a detailed report. They labeled it urgent, highest priority. The report stated that they had intercepted incontrovertible proof that the main Allied landings would target Greece and Sardinia. It also stated that any intelligence pointing towards Sicily was likely a deliberate Allied trick. This report was not just another piece of information. It was treated as a bombshell. It was immediately passed up the chain of command, from the head of intelligence to the German High Command, And finally, it was prepared for the eyes of one man, Adolf Hitler himself. The final decision would be made in a place of concrete bunkers and dense forest, hidden deep in Prussia. It was called the Wolfschanze, or the Wolf's Lair. This was Hitler's secret Eastern Front headquarters, a place of extreme security and paranoia. It was from here that he directed his war. Hitler trusted very few people. He often ignored the advice of his own generals, believing he had a unique strategic genius. But one thing he did trust was captured documents. He believed that a secret document, stolen from the enemy, was the purest form of intelligence, free from analysis or opinion. The letter from Major Martin was exactly the kind of proof he was desperate to find. In mid-May, the report on Operation Mincemeat finally reached Hitler's desk. His top generals presented the findings. They explained how a British officer had washed ashore in Spain, carrying a letter that detailed the Allied plans. They laid out the evidence. The main thrust would be Greece, a secondary attack on Sardinia. Sicily was nothing but a feint, a trick to draw German forces away from the real battle. Hitler listened intently. For him, this information confirmed everything he already suspected. It fit perfectly into his own view of the war. Some of his generals were skeptical. Italy seemed like the more logical target, but Hitler waved away their doubts. He was completely convinced. "This is definitive," he reportedly declared. The plan to trick the Germans into looking at Sicily was, in his mind, exactly the kind of clever trick the British would try. He felt he had outsmarted them. He made his decision on the spot. It was a decision that would seal the fate of thousands. He ordered a massive reorganization of his forces. The defense of Greece and Sardinia was to be prioritized above all else. He was falling for the trap, hook, line, and sinker. Hitler's orders were sent out immediately. The consequences were enormous. He ordered one of his best units, the elite 1st Panzer Division, to be transferred from France all the way to Greece to prepare for the main invasion. He sent German torpedo boats to patrol the Greek islands. Even more critically, he diverted troops and equipment that were already designated for Sicily. He weakened the island's defenses significantly, believing it was no longer the primary target. Every tank moved, every soldier relocated, was a quiet victory for the spies back in London. The ghost of Major Martin was moving armies.